Listen to this story carefully because what you're about to hear will shock you to your core. This is about a mother's love, betrayal, and how karma finds its way back to those who deserve it. You will not believe how this ends. Grace sat on the cold concrete floor of her tiny one-room apartment, crying silently as she stared at the phone that had been silent for months. Her two sons, Anthony and Samuel, had made it big in Lagos. They were now successful businessmen with fancy cars and beautiful houses. But here she was, their own mother, struggling to find money for her next meal. 25 years ago, when her husband David died in that terrible car accident, Grace was left with nothing but two young boys and a broken heart. David had been everything to her: provider, protector, best friend. The night he died, Grace held her sons close and made a promise that would change her life forever. "Boys," she whispered through her tears, "I will do everything in my power to make sure you both succeed, even if it kills me." And she meant every single word. Grace sold her wedding ring, the only valuable thing she owned. She worked 3 jobs: cleaning offices at night, washing clothes for wealthy families during the day, and selling roasted corn by the roadside in the evenings. Her hands became rough and cracked. Her back ached constantly. But she never complained, not even once. When Anthony needed school fees for secondary school, Grace sold her late husband's watch. When Samuel wanted to join the school football team and needed boots, Grace borrowed money from a loan shark who charged outrageous interest rates. She paid for those boots by working extra shifts for 6 months straight. The boys were brilliant students. Anthony excelled in mathematics and business studies, while Samuel was gifted in engineering and technology. Their teachers always praised them, but they had no idea of the sacrifice their mother was making behind the scenes. "These boys are destined for greatness," their principal once told Grace during a parent-teacher meeting. "With proper university education, they will go far in life." Grace nodded with pride, even though she had no idea how she would afford university fees. But she was determined to find a way. When Anthony finished secondary school, he gained admission to study business administration at the University of Lagos. Grace was overjoyed, but the fees were astronomical, more money than she had ever seen in her life. "Mama," Anthony said one evening, "maybe I should just start working. The fees are too much. We can't afford it." Grace looked at her firstborn son with fierce determination. "You will go to that university," she said firmly. "I didn't suffer all these years for you to give up on your dreams now." That night, Grace did something she had never done before. She went to see Mr. Williams, the wealthiest man in their village, a man known for his ruthless business dealings and his appetite for young women. "Please, sir," Grace begged, kneeling in his luxurious living room. "I need money for my son's education. I will work for you, I will do anything. Just please help me." Mr. Williams looked at her with hungry eyes. Grace was still beautiful despite the years of hardship. Her skin was smooth, her figure still attractive. "Anything?" he asked with a sly smile. Grace's heart pounded. She knew what he was suggesting. "Sir, I just need the money for my son's school fees." "I'll give you the money," Mr. Williams said, moving closer to her. "But you know what I want in return." Grace closed her eyes, thinking of Anthony's bright future. "How much?" she whispered. "Enough for all 4 years of his education. But you'll belong to me during that time. You'll be my woman." That night, Grace sold her dignity for her son's future. For 4 years, she endured Mr. Williams' advances, his demands, his humiliation. Also, Anthony could study without worrying about money. Anthony never knew the truth. He thought his mother had gotten a loan from the bank. When Samuel was ready for university 2 years later, Grace had to make the same terrible choice again. This time, it was with Mr. Williams' business partner, Chief Okafor, another wealthy man who demanded the same price for his generosity. By the time both boys graduated from university, Grace had aged dramatically. The stress, the shame, the exhaustion had taken their toll. She looked like a woman 20 years older than her actual age. But she was proud. Her boys had both graduated with first-class honors. Anthony immediately got a job with a multinational company in Lagos, while Samuel was hired by a top engineering firm. "Mama," Anthony said on his graduation day, "I promise I will take care of you now. You will never suffer again." Samuel hugged her tightly. "We will build you a beautiful house, Mama. We will give you everything you deserve." Grace believed them. She had sacrificed everything for this moment. The first year after their graduation, the boys called regularly. They sent small amounts of money, never enough to change Grace's situation significantly, but enough to show they remembered her. "Mama, just be patient," Anthony would say during their phone calls. "We're still establishing ourselves. Soon, we'll have enough to really help you." Grace understood. She continued living in her one-room apartment, continued struggling, but she was hopeful. Her boys would soon lift her out of poverty. The second year, the phone calls became less frequent. The money stopped coming altogether. "When I call Anthony, his phone is always busy," Grace confided to her neighbor, Mrs. Adaora. "When I call Samuel, he always says he's in a meeting and will call back, but he never does." Mrs. Adaora shook her head sadly. "These children of nowadays, once they see small money, they forget where they came from."
No, Grace insisted.
"My boys are not like that. They're just busy building their careers. They haven't forgotten me." But deep down, Grace was starting to worry. By the third year, Grace had not heard from either of her sons in months. Her neighbors whispered behind her back. "See that woman," they would say. "She killed herself training those boys, and now they've abandoned her like an old rag." Grace tried calling them countless times. Anthony's number was no longer reachable. Samuel's phone would ring, but he never answered. One day, Grace's landlord came knocking. "Woman," he said harshly, "you haven't paid rent in 4 months. I want you out of this house by tomorrow." Grace fell to her knees. "Please, sir, just give me more time. My sons will send money soon. They're successful now, they just need to dash." "I don't want to hear stories," the landlord interrupted. "Tomorrow morning, you and your belongings must be gone." That night, Grace packed her few possessions into 2 old bags. She had nowhere to go. At 62 years old, she was about to become homeless. The next morning, Grace sat on the roadside with her bags, watching as other tenants moved into her former apartment. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. "God," she whispered, looking up at the sky. "I gave everything for those boys. I sacrificed my body, my dignity, my youth. Where are they now when I need them most?" Mrs. Adaora found Grace sleeping under a tree 3 days later. "Sister Grace," she exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" Grace looked up with tired eyes. "I have nowhere to go," she said simply. Mrs. Adaora helped Grace to her feet. "You can stay in my boys' quarters for now. It's small, but it's better than sleeping outside." Grace was grateful beyond words. The boys' quarters was just a tiny room behind Mrs. Adaora's house, with no electricity and only a small window for ventilation. But it was shelter. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "God will bless you for your kindness." Meanwhile, in Lagos, Anthony and Samuel were living their best lives. Anthony now owned a successful logistics company and lived in a 5-bedroom mansion in Victoria Island. He drove a Range Rover and wore expensive suits. His friends knew him as a self-made millionaire. Samuel had started his own construction company and was equally successful. He lived in a beautiful house in Lekki and was engaged to a banker named Chioma. Neither of them ever mentioned their mother to their friends or colleagues. In fact, they had created entirely new backgrounds for themselves. "I'm from a wealthy family in Abuja," Anthony would tell people. "My father was a prominent businessman before he died." Samuel told similar lies. "My parents died in a plane crash when I was young," he would say. "I was raised by my uncle who was a diplomat." They had completely erased Grace from their story. One evening, Anthony was having dinner with his girlfriend, Nicole, at an expensive restaurant in Ikoyi. "Darling," Nicole said, "when are you going to take me to meet your family? We've been dating for 2 years, and I've never met any of your relatives." Anthony shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My family, they're very private people. They don't like meeting new people. But I'm not new people, Nicole protested. I'm your girlfriend. Don't you think it's time? Anthony reached across the table and took her hand. Soon, baby. Soon. But Anthony had no intention of ever introducing Nicole to Grace. How could he explain that his wealthy background was a lie? How could he tell her that his mother was living in poverty while he enjoyed luxury? The same conversations were happening between Samuel and Chioma. Samuel, why haven't I met your family? Chioma asked one night as they lay in bed in Samuel's expensive apartment. Babe, you know my parents are dead, Samuel replied. And my uncle is always traveling. There's really no family for you to meet. What about aunts, cousins, family friends? Somebody who knew you growing up? Samuel kissed her forehead. You're my family now. That's all that matters. But Chioma was suspicious. In Nigerian culture, it was almost impossible for someone to have absolutely no family connections. She began to wonder what Samuel was hiding. Back in the village, Grace's health was deteriorating rapidly. The stress of homelessness, combined with years of sacrifice and poor nutrition, had taken its toll. She developed high blood pressure and diabetes, but she couldn't afford medical treatment. Sister Grace, Mrs. Adaora said one morning, finding Grace collapsed on the floor of the boys' quarters. You need to go to the hospital immediately. I have no money for hospital, Grace whispered weakly. Let me just rest here. Mrs. Adaora shook her head. This is serious. Let me call your sons. Where are their phone numbers? Grace gave her the numbers, but Mrs. Adaora's calls went unanswered, just like they had for Grace for years. These boys are heartless, Mrs. Adaora said angrily. How can they abandon their mother like this? Grace spent 3 days in critical condition before a kind doctor at the local clinic agreed to treat her for free. But he warned that without proper medication and nutrition, her condition would only get worse. You need to contact your family, the doctor advised. You need people who can take care of you. Grace just smiled sadly. Doctor, I have no family. Meanwhile, Anthony was planning his wedding to Nicole. The venue was booked at one of Lagos' most exclusive hotels. The guest list included politicians, business moguls, and celebrities. It was going to be the wedding of the year. I want everything to be perfect, Anthony told his wedding planner. Money is no object. But as the wedding approached, Nicole's questions about his family became more persistent. Anthony, I don't understand. Not even one person from your family will be at our wedding? What will people think? Anthony was getting frustrated. Nicole, I've told you 100 times. My family is very private. They don't attend public events. Then let's have a small traditional ceremony with them before the big wedding, Nicole suggested. Just you, me, and your family. Nothing public. Anthony felt trapped. He couldn't keep making excuses forever. That same week, Samuel was facing similar pressure from Chioma. Samuel, I'm starting to think you're ashamed of me, Chioma said during an argument. Why else would you refuse to let me meet your family? That's not true, and you know it, Samuel replied defensively. Then prove it, Chioma challenged. Take me to meet someone from your family. Anyone. If you can't do that, then maybe we should reconsider this relationship. Samuel realized he was at a crossroads. He either had to tell the truth or risk losing Chioma. That night, Samuel called Anthony for the first time in months. Guy, we need to talk, Samuel said when Anthony picked up. Samuel? What's going on? It's about our situation. Chioma is asking too many questions about family. She's threatening to leave me if I don't introduce her to someone. Anthony sighed heavily. Nicole is doing the same thing. This is becoming a real problem. What are we going to do? There was a long pause before Anthony spoke. Maybe it's time we reconnected with Mama. Samuel was shocked. Are you serious? After all these years? Think about it, Anthony said. We can clean her up, put her in a nice dress, teach her what to say. She can play the role of our mother for our girlfriends. After that, we can go back to our normal lives. Samuel considered this. But what if she starts making demands? What if she wants to stay in our lives permanently? We'll handle that when we get there, Anthony replied. Right now, we need her more than she needs us. The irony of this statement was completely lost on both of them. The next day, Anthony drove to the village for the first time in over 5 years. He had told Nicole he was going on a business trip. When he arrived at the family compound, he was shocked to find it empty and abandoned. The roof was leaking, weeds had overgrown the yard, and the windows were broken. "Excuse me," Anthony called to a young man passing by. "Do you know what happened to the woman who used to live here? Grace Nwosu." The young man looked at him suspiciously. "Who's asking?"
I'm
"I'm her son," Anthony said reluctantly. The young man's expression changed to one of disgust. "You're one of the sons who abandoned her? The ones who left her to suffer while you went to enjoy yourselves in Lagos?" Anthony felt a stab of shame, but he pushed it aside. "Just tell me where she is." "She's staying with Mrs. Adaora in the boys' quarters. But I warn you, she's very sick. The woman who sacrificed everything for you is dying, and you're just showing up now." Anthony found Mrs. Adaora's house and knocked on the door. When Mrs. Adaora saw him, her face showed a mixture of shock and anger. "So you finally decided to come home," she said coldly. "Do you know your mother is dying?" "Dying?" Anthony felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean dying?" "High blood pressure, diabetes, malnutrition. She's been sick for months, but she has no money for treatment." "Where have you been?" Mrs. Adaora led Anthony to the boys' quarters. When he saw Grace lying on a thin mattress on the floor, he almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had once been beautiful and vibrant was now thin, frail, and looked decades older than her age.
Manga,
Anthony whispered. Grace opened her eyes slowly. When she saw Anthony, she thought she was dreaming. "Anthony? Is that really you, my son?" Anthony knelt beside the mattress, tears filling his eyes despite himself. "Yes, Mama, it's me." Grace struggled to sit up. "My son, you came back. I knew you would never abandon me. I told them you were just busy, that you would come back for me." Anthony felt a crushing weight of guilt. Here was his mother, still defending him even after years of abandonment. "Mama, I'm here now," he said, though he had no intention of staying. "Are you well, my son? Are you eating well? Do you have a good job?" Grace asked, her voice weak but filled with love. Anthony looked around the tiny, airless room where his mother was living. This was the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, and she was still worried about his well-being. "I'm fine, Mama." "I'm doing very well." Grace smiled weakly. "I knew it. I knew my sacrifice was worth it. You've always been destined for greatness." The word sacrifice hit Anthony like a punch to the stomach. He realized he had no idea what sacrifices his mother had made for him and Samuel. "Mama, what sacrifices?" he asked gently. Grace looked at him with surprise. "You don't remember? The money for your university fees, for Samuel's fees? I thought you knew." "Knew what, Mama?" Grace hesitated. She had never told her sons the truth about how she raised the money for their education. She had planned to take that secret to her grave. "It's not important now," she said. "You're here. That's all that matters." But Anthony pressed on. "Mama, please tell me, how did you get the money for our school fees? I always thought you got a loan from the bank." Grace looked away. "My son, some things are better left in the past." Mrs. Adaora, who had been listening from the doorway, couldn't contain herself any longer. "Since you want to know," she said angrily, "your mother sold herself to pay for your education. She became Mr. William's mistress for 4 years to pay your fees, and Chief Okafor's mistress for another 4 years to pay Samuel's fees. She sacrificed her dignity, her self-respect, everything, so you boys could have a future." Anthony felt like the ground had opened up and swallowed him. What are you saying?" "Your mother," Mrs. Adaora continued, "endured humiliation and abuse from those men, so you could wear fine clothes to university and never lack anything. And this is how you repay her?" By abandoning her when she needs you most. Anthony looked at Grace, who was crying silently. Mama, is this true? Grace nodded slowly. I would do it again, my son. Your success was worth every sacrifice. Anthony broke down completely. The weight of what his mother had endured, combined with his years of neglect, was too much to bear. I'm so sorry, Mama, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. But even as he cried, a part of Anthony was calculating. He couldn't let this story get out. If Nicole or his business associates ever learned the truth about his background, his reputation would be ruined. Mama, he said, wiping his tears, I want to take you to Lagos. I want to take care of you properly. Grace's face lit up with joy. Really? You want me to come to Lagos? Yes, Mama. You deserve the best. I'm going to give you everything you've always wanted. Mrs. Adaora looked at Anthony suspiciously. After years of neglect, why was he suddenly interested in helping his mother? That evening, Anthony called Samuel to tell him what he had learned. She did what? Samuel was as shocked as Anthony had been. She sold herself, man. She became those men's mistress to pay our school fees. There was a long silence before Samuel spoke. No wonder she always looked so tired and sad during our university years. But that's not the point right now, Anthony said. The point is, if this story ever gets out, we're finished. Imagine if our business partners, our girlfriends, everyone we know found out that our success was built on our mother's degradation. Samuel saw where Anthony was going with this. So what do you suggest? We bring her to Lagos, but we control the narrative. We tell people she's our distant aunt who recently lost her husband. We give her a small allowance, find her a quiet place to live, and make sure she understands she can never tell anyone the real. She won't refuse. She's desperate. She'll do whatever we say as long as we provide for her. The next day, Anthony returned to the village with Samuel. Grace was overjoyed to see both her sons together. My boys, she said, tears streaming down her face. My prayers have been answered. You both came back for me. Anthony and Samuel hugged their mother, but their embrace felt hollow. They were not there out of love or guilt. They were there to protect their own interests. Mama, Anthony said, we're taking you to Lagos immediately. We've arranged everything. Grace was so happy she could barely speak. Finally, after years of suffering, her sons were going to take care of her. They drove Grace to Lagos that same day. But instead of taking her to Anthony's mansion or Samuel's house, they took her to a small one-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood. This is your new home, Mama, Samuel said as they showed her around the tiny space. Grace looked around, confused. The apartment was clean but very small and basic. She had expected to live with one of her sons, to finally be part of their family again. Am I not staying with you? She asked. Mama, this is better, Anthony explained. You'll have your own space, your own privacy. We'll visit you regularly and take care of all your expenses. Grace nodded, though she felt a little disappointed. Still, it was much better than the boys' quarters in the village. There's just one thing, Mama, Samuel said. When we introduce you to our friends and colleagues, we're going to say you're our aunt, not our mother. Grace was confused. Why my son? It's complicated, Mama, Anthony said. For business reasons, it's better this way. You understand, right? Grace didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. She was just grateful to be near her sons again. And Mama, Samuel added, you can never tell anyone about what you did to pay our school fees. That stays between us. Okay? Grace felt a sharp pain in her chest. Her sons were ashamed of what she had done. They didn't see it as a sacrifice. They saw it as something embarrassing that could damage their reputation. I understand, she whispered. Over the next few weeks, Anthony and Samuel introduced Grace to their girlfriends as their aunt. Nicole, meet Aunt Grace, Anthony said when he brought Nicole to visit. She's my father's sister. She just moved to Lagos from Abuja. Nicole smiled warmly at Grace. It's so nice to finally meet someone from Anthony's family. Grace played her role perfectly, speaking politely but briefly, never giving away the truth about her relationship with Anthony. Similarly, Samuel introduced Grace to Chioma. "This is Aunt Grace," Samuel told Chioma. "She's been like a mother to me and Anthony since our parents died." Chioma was charmed by Grace's gentle demeanor. "She's so sweet," she told Samuel later. "I can see where you get your kind heart from." If only she knew the truth. For several months, the arrangement seemed to work. Grace lived quietly in her small apartment, grateful for the monthly allowance her sons provided. Anthony and Samuel visited occasionally, but their visits were brief and formal. Grace noticed that both her sons seemed different, colder, more distant. They spoke to her politely but without real warmth. It was as if they were fulfilling an obligation rather than spending time with their mother. But Grace told herself she should be grateful. At least she had a roof over her head and food to eat. However, things began to change when Anthony's wedding planning intensified. "Mama," Anthony said during one of his visits, "I'm getting married next month." Grace's face lit up with joy. "My son, this is wonderful news. When do I meet the bride's family? When do we start the traditional preparations?" Anthony shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Mama, about that, you won't be involved in the wedding preparations." Grace looked confused. "What do you mean, my son? The wedding is going to be very elite. Governors, ministers, business tycoons. You understand, right? It's not really your type of event." Grace felt like she had been slapped. "Not my type of event? Anthony, I'm your mother. How can your wedding not be my type of event?" "You're my aunt," Anthony corrected her firmly. "Remember? And as my aunt, you wouldn't normally be expected to play a major role in the wedding." Grace stared at her son in disbelief. "You don't want me at your wedding?" "I didn't say that," Anthony replied. "You can attend the church service, but you won't be at the high table, and you won't participate in the traditional ceremonies." Grace felt her heart breaking into a million pieces. She had dreamed of this day since Anthony was a little boy. She had imagined dancing at his wedding, blessing his union, being introduced proudly as the mother of the groom. "Anthony," she said quietly, "I gave up everything for you. I sacrificed my whole life so you could have a future. And now you're telling me I can't even be your mother at your own wedding." Anthony felt a flicker of guilt, but he pushed it aside. "Mama, you need to understand. This wedding is business. It's about networking, about building relationships that will help my company grow. Having you there as my mother would complicate things." "Complicate things how?" "People would ask questions about your background, about how you raised us. The story doesn't fit with the image I've built." Grace stood up slowly, her legs shaking. "The story doesn't fit? Anthony, the story is that I loved you enough to sacrifice everything for you. What part of that doesn't fit?" "Mama, please don't make this difficult." Grace looked at her son. This man she had given her life for, and saw a stranger. The kind, loving boy she had raised was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. "Get out," she said quietly. Anthony was surprised. "What? Get out of my house," Grace said more firmly. "If I'm not good enough to be your mother at your wedding, then I'm not good enough to be your aunt either." Anthony started to protest, but Grace turned her back to him. "Just leave, Anthony. Just leave." Anthony left, but he wasn't worried. He was confident that Grace would calm down and apologize. After all, she needed the monthly allowance he provided. But Grace didn't calm down. For the first time in her life, she was angry. Not just sad or disappointed, but genuinely furious at the ingratitude of her sons. She had spent her entire adult life putting their needs before her own. She had endured humiliation and degradation to pay for their education. And now they were treating her like an embarrassment. That night, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She picked up her phone and called Mrs. Adaora. "Sister Grace." Mrs. Adaora was surprised to hear from her. "How are you? How is life in Lagos?" "Sister Adaora," Grace said, "I need to tell you something. and I need you to tell everyone in the village." The next day, Mrs. Adaora gathered all the women in the village market. "Listen to what Grace told me," she began, and then she told them everything. About how Anthony and Samuel had been lying about their backgrounds, how they had introduced their own mother as their aunt, and how Anthony didn't want Grace at his wedding. The story spread like wildfire throughout the village and beyond. Within days, it had reached social media. Someone posted on Facebook, "Anthony Nwosu, the big man who owns Nwosu Logistics, is ashamed of his own mother. The woman who sacrificed everything for his education is being treated like a servant." The post was shared thousands of times. People began commenting with their own stories of ungrateful children and selfish behavior. A journalist from a popular blog saw the story and decided to investigate. Within a week, she had interviewed Mrs. Adaora, the doctors who treated Grace for free, and several other villagers who remembered Grace's struggles. The story was published with the headline, "From Riches to Shame: How Successful Businessman Anthony Nwosu Abandoned the Mother Who Sacrificed Everything for His Education." The article included photos of Grace in her current state and compared them to photos of Anthony's luxurious lifestyle. The story went viral. Anthony's phone started ringing nonstop. His business partners were calling, his clients were asking questions, and his staff were whispering in the corridors. Anthony, his business partner, called him urgently. "Have you seen what's trending online about you?" Anthony's hands were shaking as he read the article. His worst nightmare had come true. His carefully constructed image was crumbling. Nicole confronted him that same day. "Anthony, I just read the most horrible story online. Please tell me it's not true. Please tell me that woman isn't really your mother and you didn't abandon her." Anthony tried to lie, but Nicole had already spoken to some of his staff who confirmed the story. "You lied to me," Nicole said, her voice filled with disgust. "For 2 years, you lied to my face about everything. Your family, your background, your character. Everything was a lie." "Nicole, let me explain dash." "Explain what?" Nicole shouted. "Explain how you abandoned the mother who sacrificed everything for you? Explain how you were planning to get married without even inviting her? Explain how you've been lying to me for years." Nicole threw her engagement ring at Anthony. "I can't marry someone with such a black heart. Someone who could treat his own mother like this is capable of treating anyone badly." She walked out of Anthony's life that day and never looked back. Samuel was facing similar consequences. Chioma had also seen the story online. "Samuel, tell me this isn't true," she begged. "Tell me you didn't abandon your mother." But Samuel couldn't lie anymore. The evidence was too overwhelming. "Chioma, you don't understand dash." "I understand perfectly," Chioma said. "You're a heartless man who turned his back on the woman who gave him life. If you can do that to your mother, what will you do to me when I'm no longer useful to you?" Chioma ended their relationship immediately. But the personal consequences were just the beginning. Anthony's business began to collapse as clients canceled contracts and partners withdrew their investments. "We can't be associated with someone who abandons his own mother," one major client explained. "What does that say about his character?" Samuel's construction company also began losing contracts. In Nigeria, family values are extremely important, and both men were now seen as having no moral foundation. Within 3 months, both Anthony and Samuel had lost everything: their businesses, their relationships, their reputations, and most of their wealth. They were forced to sell their houses and cars to pay their debts. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, they went to Grace's apartment. Grace was surprised to see them standing at her door, looking defeated and desperate. "Mama," Anthony said, his voice cracking, "we're sorry. We're so sorry." Grace looked at her sons, these men who had once been powerful and arrogant, and saw them as they really were, broken, humbled, and finally understanding the consequences of their actions. "We lost everything, Mama," Samuel said, tears streaming down his face. "Our businesses are gone, our houses are gone, our girlfriends left us. Everyone in Lagos knows what we did to you." Grace felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. She was sad to see her sons suffering, but she was relieved that justice had finally been served. "And what do you want from me now?" she asked quietly. "We want to make things right," Anthony said. "We want to be your sons again, your real sons. We want to take care of you the way we should have from the beginning." Grace looked at them for a long moment. "And if you rebuild your wealth? If you become successful again? What guarantee do I have that you won't abandon me again when it's convenient?" Both men fell to their knees. "Mama," Samuel said, "we've learned our lesson. We know now that success without family is meaningless. We know that no amount of money is worth losing your love and respect." Anthony nodded. "Mama, we were fools. We thought we were too good for our background, too good for the village, too good for you. But we realize now that you are the source of everything good in our lives." Grace felt tears coming to her eyes. Despite everything they had done to her, these were still her children. She had carried them in her womb, nursed them as babies, and loved them unconditionally for over 30 years. "Get up," she said gently. "Both of you, get up." She opened her arms, and both men fell into her embrace. "I forgive you," Grace whispered. "But things will be different from now on. No more lies, no more shame about your background. If you want me in your lives, you take me as I am, your mother, who sacrificed everything for you." Both men nodded eagerly. "And," Grace continued, "you will never again treat anyone the way you treated me. Success should make you more generous, not more selfish. Wealth should make you more humble, not more proud." Over the following months, Anthony and Samuel worked hard to rebuild their lives. But this time, with their mother at the center of everything they did. They moved Grace out of the small apartment and into a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. But more importantly, they made sure she was involved in every aspect of their lives. When Anthony started a new, smaller business, Grace was the first person he consulted. "Mama, what do you think of this idea?" he would ask, genuinely valuing her opinion. Samuel did the same with his new construction ventures. "Mama, you have more wisdom than any business school could teach," he told her. "Your advice is worth more than any consultant's." The three of them became inseparable. They had dinner together every Sunday, and Grace's house became the family headquarters where all important decisions were made. But the most important change was in how the brothers treated other people. They remembered their mother's words about success making you more generous, not more selfish. Anthony started a scholarship program for poor students, paying their university fees without demanding anything in return. He remembered the sacrifice his mother had made for his education and wanted to save other parents from the same humiliation. Samuel began hiring workers from disadvantaged backgrounds and paying them fair wages. "Everyone deserves a chance," he would tell people. "My mother taught me that hard work and sacrifice should be rewarded, not exploited." Word of their transformation spread just as quickly as the original scandal had. People were amazed by the change in both men. "You know, I judged them too harshly," one former business partner admitted. "When I see how they treat their mother now, how they've learned from their mistakes, I realize that people can change." Slowly, Anthony and Samuel began to regain the respect of their community. But this time it was based on their character, not just their wealth. One day, as the three of them sat in Grace's garden, she looked at her sons with pride. "You know," she said, "I'm actually grateful for everything that happened." Both men looked at her in surprise.
"Grateful, Mama?"
Anthony asked. Grace nodded. "If you hadn't lost everything, you might never have learned these lessons. You might have continued living those fake lives, being ashamed of who you really are. The pain was necessary to bring you back to the truth." Samuel took his mother's hand. "Mama, you're the strongest woman I know. After everything we put you through, you still found it in your heart to forgive us." Grace smiled. "My sons, that's what real love does. Forgives, it endures, and it never gives up hope. I never stopped believing that one day you would come back to me." Anthony wiped tears from his eyes. "Mama, I promise you this. For the rest of our lives, we will make sure you know how much we love and appreciate you. We will never again take your sacrifices for granted. And we'll make sure, Samuel added, that our children know the story of their grandmother, not the sanitized version we tried to create, but the real story of a woman who sacrificed everything for her family. Grace's face lit up. Children? Are you both planning to get married soon? Anthony laughed. Well, Mama, there is someone I've been seeing. Her name is Jennifer, and she's a teacher. She's kind, humble, and she reminds me a lot of you. And I've met someone too, Samuel said. Her name is Patience, and she works with orphan children. When I told her our story, the real story, she said it made her love me more, not less. Grace clapped her hands together. Bring them to meet me. I want to welcome them into our family properly this time. Both men laughed, remembering how different things had been with their previous relationships. The next month, Anthony brought Jennifer to meet Grace. Unlike Nicole, who had been impressed by wealth and status, Jennifer was drawn to the genuine warmth of the family. Mrs. Grace, Jennifer said, Anthony has told me everything about what you did for him and Samuel. You're an inspiration to me. I hope I can be half the mother to my children that you've been to yours. Grace embraced Jennifer warmly. My daughter, welcome to our family. And please call me Mama. Samuel's girlfriend, Patience, had a similar reaction when she met Grace. Mama Grace, Patience said, your story gives me hope. It shows that no matter how difficult things get, love always finds a way to win in the end. Both women became like daughters to Grace, and she found herself happier than she had been in years. 6 months later, Anthony and Jennifer had a beautiful wedding. But this time, Grace sat at the high table, wearing a gorgeous traditional outfit that Anthony had specially made for her. When it came time for the speeches, Anthony stood up and called for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I want to tell you about the most important person in my life, my mother, Grace Nwosu. The crowd listened intently as Anthony told the real story, not the sanitized version he had once planned, but the truth about his mother's sacrifices, his own mistakes, and the lessons he had learned. This woman, Anthony said, pointing to Grace, sold her dignity to pay for my education. She endured humiliation and hardship so that I could have opportunities she never had. And when I became successful, I was ashamed of her sacrifices instead of being proud of them. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. I lost everything because I forgot where I came from, Anthony continued. But losing everything taught me what really matters. Success without family is meaningless. Wealth without character is worthless. And no achievement is worth abandoning the people who made it possible. He walked over to Grace and knelt beside her chair. Mama, in front of all these witnesses, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your sacrifices. Thank you for your forgiveness. And thank you for never giving up on me. I am the man I am today because of you. The entire wedding hall erupted in applause. Grace was crying tears of joy, finally receiving the recognition and respect she had always deserved. Samuel's wedding to Patience was equally beautiful, and he gave a similar speech honoring his mother. Both couples settled near Grace, and the family became closer than ever. When Anthony and Jennifer had their first child, a beautiful baby girl, they named her Grace in honor of her grandmother. Little Grace, Big Grace said as she held her granddaughter. You are blessed to be born into a family that has learned the value of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Samuel and Patience also had children, and Grace's house became filled with the laughter of grandchildren who adored their grandmother. The children grew up hearing the real story of their grandmother's sacrifices and their father's mistakes. It became a family legend that taught them the importance of staying humble no matter how successful they became. Years later, when Grace was in her 70s, she fell ill again. But this time, she was surrounded by love and the best medical care money could buy. Anthony and Samuel took turns staying with her in the hospital, never leaving her side. My sons, Grace said weakly from her hospital bed, I'm so proud of the men you've become. You've learned that true success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by the lives you touch and the love you give. Mama, Anthony said, holding her hand, you taught us everything we know about love, sacrifice, and perseverance. We'll make sure our children carry on those lessons. Samuel nodded. Mama, because of you, our family line will be strong for generations to come. Your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will know about the woman who sacrificed everything for love. Grace smiled peacefully. That's all I ever wanted for my family to be whole, to love each other, and to remember that no matter how high you rise, you must never forget where you came from. Grace recovered from that illness and lived for many more years, surrounded by the love she had always deserved. She saw her grandchildren graduate from university, get married, and have children of their own. When she finally passed away at the age of 85, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by her story. There were the students who had benefited from Anthony's scholarship program, the workers who had been given opportunities by Samuel's company, and countless others who had been inspired by her example of unconditional love and forgiveness. Anthony and Samuel, now gray-haired men themselves, stood at their mother's graveside with tears streaming down their faces. She never stopped loving us, Anthony said. Even when we didn't deserve it, even when we abandoned her, she never stopped believing in us. And she taught us the most important lesson of all, Samuel added. That real wealth isn't measured in money or possessions, but in the relationships we build and the love we share. As they laid their mother to rest, both men made a silent promise to continue her legacy of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Today, both Anthony and Samuel run successful businesses again, but their approach to success is completely different from before. They treat their employees like family, they give generously to charity, and they never forget to honor their mother's memory. They established the Grace Nwosu Foundation, which provides scholarships to disadvantaged students and supports struggling single mothers. Every year, on the anniversary of their mother's death, they visit her grave and renew their commitment to living according to the values she taught them. Their children and grandchildren have grown up hearing the story of their grandmother Grace, not just the sanitized version, but the complete truth about her sacrifices, their father's mistakes, and the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. And in boardrooms and offices across Lagos, when young entrepreneurs ask Anthony and Samuel for advice on achieving success, they always give the same answer. Success without character is failure. Wealth without family is poverty. And no achievement is worth sacrificing the people who love you unconditionally. The story of Grace Nwosu and her two sons has become legendary in their community, not because of the wealth they accumulated, but because of the lesson they learned, that the greatest riches in life are the relationships we cherish and the love we share. And somewhere in heaven, Grace looks down on her family with a smile, knowing that her sacrifices were not in vain, and that the seeds of love she planted have grown into a tree that will shade generations to come. Because in the end, love always wins. Truth always prevails, and a mother's sacrifice is never forgotten, even when it takes years for her children to understand its true value. That, my friends, is the power of unconditional love. That is the strength of a mother's heart, and that is why we must never, ever take our families for granted. What did you think about this story? How did it make you feel? Have you ever seen ungrateful children in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories that will touch your heart and change your perspective on life. Remember, success means nothing if you forget the people who made it possible. Family is everything, and love, real love, never gives up. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your families.